Welcome back to the Workgrid podcast. In today's episode, we're diving deep into the evolving landscape of the digital workplace. Today, we have the privilege of hosting two distinguished guests from ClearBox Consulting, a firm at the forefront of addressing the complex business challenges within the digital workplace that include Intranet strategy, SharePoint, Office 365, governance, and developing effective communication strategies. Our first guest, Sam Marshall, owner of ClearBox Consulting, is an authority in the field, known for his insightful perspectives on how businesses can leverage digital tools to foster a more engaged and productive workforce. Sam's expertise in navigating the intricacies of digital workplace, employee experience platforms, has made him a sought-after advisor for organizations looking to thrive and make the most of their tech stack. Joining Sam is Suzie Robinson, whose consulting work in evaluating and reviewing intranet employee communication tools has been instrumental in helping to guide businesses towards making informed decisions and align their unique operational needs. Suzie's contributions to ClearBox Consulting's comprehensive report titled Intranet and Employee Experience Platforms Report version 3 has been invaluable, and this report is renowned for its detailed analysis of over 20 robust intranet and comms tools and assesses and scores these platforms across 8 critical business scenarios, offering a tremendous resource for anyone looking to enhance their digital workplace environment. In this episode, Sam and Suzie bring a wealth of information and knowledge in and around the employee experience. We discuss the challenges of the digital workplace ecosystem, the rise of AI, intranet best practices, emerging trends, and the practical advice for digital workplace leaders such as yourself. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into a conversation with the folks at ClearBox Consulting. Hello, Sam. Hello, Suzie. Welcome to the Workgrid podcast. Before we get started, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and, for those who may not be aware, a bit about ClearBox Consulting?
I'll let Suzie go first.
Oh, thank you very much. I am Suzie Robinson. I have worked in the world of intranets and internal comms for a really disturbing amount of time now. When I think about it, it's about 15 years I've worked in the industry. I was a practitioner for many years, mainly working in organisations with a lot of frontline workers. And I joined ClearBox Consulting back in 2019. Just before the pandemic, and I was brought in to look after the reports that Sam and the ClearBox team have been publishing for a number of years at that point. Took over managing those, also joined the consulting side of the business as well, which I'll let Sam talk about in a bit more detail, and I head up the report writing and creation and editing process for the team.
Hi, Rob. Thank you very much for inviting us both on the podcast. So I'm Sam Marshall. I'm the owner and founder of ClearBox Consulting. So I've been way more than 15 years disturbingly in this space. Thanks, Suzie, for setting me up for that one. And most of my career, I started out in artificial intelligence and then moved into intranets and digital workplaces over 20 years ago. And for the last 17 years in ClearBox, we've really focused on the people and business side of intranets and digital workplaces. So most of what we do is around strategy, advisory work, and of course, the reports that Suzie mentioned. When people come to us, I see ourselves as a little bit like gym coaches. So you buy the equipment right from Microsoft or Workgrid or some of the other vendors out there. But then the question is, well, how are you going to use this in a way that's optimal for your organization? So we're like the coaches that say, well, let's have a look at the team, let's have a look at your goals and figure out a program that's just right for you. And then we set them off on their way and we move on to any other kind of industry vertical. You know, we find it really fascinating to work with everybody from small charities through to multinational telcos and construction companies.
That's fantastic. You know, one of the bits I'd like to get into today is the latest report, Intranet Employee Experience Report version 3. And it's almost hard to call it a report because it's nearly 1,000 pages long, and it covers, I dare say, it covers this industry better than many of the nameless analyst firms that are out there in terms of intranets, employee communication platforms. Could you tell us a bit about its history and really how it's evolved over the last few years?
So I'll start with the history, and then Susie can jump in at the point where she took over. So we first started looking in this space in 2015, and that was a time when SharePoint was really kind of not well regarded for its user experience. It was pretty clunky, and I think the saying was you can build anything in SharePoint as long as you've got enough time, money, and aspirin. And so there was a growth in service providers who were then putting out products to sit on top of SharePoint. So our first report looked at 6 products. That's all I could find. And then the next one looked at, I think, about 26. And then the next one looked at about 58. And it was just growing and growing. And then at the same time, we were mindful that there were other trajectories that were going on. So there were a lot of non-SharePoint independent intranets that were doing some really interesting things. And there was a growth in frontline worker, employee-oriented apps. So that's where Susie came in, because I thought there was a big opportunity to broaden our horizons and look at what else was happening.
Excellent.
Yes. Yeah, so I then started in 2019 and picked up the SharePoint report that was halfway through when I joined, and so had a crash course in the report writing process and a look at all of the different products that we were already working with, and then spent some time meeting with different vendors, having a look at the market and really focusing in on the employee mobile app market first of all, to have a look at those products and what they're all doing, the way they approach their different audiences in very different ways actually, from intranet providers, and the real needs of frontline workers as well, which are also quite surprisingly different from desk-based workers. And did a huge amount of research into them and that market, and we created the employee mobile apps report, which we did a lot of revising and writing for during the pandemic. So that was kind of helpful in a way, I suppose, to focus the mind. And we then we published that report, and we soon afterwards published an independent intranets report, which is those products that don't rely on SharePoint in order to run. And then in recent years, we've been consolidating the separate reports into one, because we felt that there are similarities between them. The way that they approach our scenarios varies, and the purposes behind them varies, but actually what they're trying to do is broadly the same. And so we've been consolidating our different reports, and thankfully been able to make it a free resource as well for the last few years, which has been a really big change and a really positive development to expand out our readership as much as we can to help folks find the right solutions.
So I think for me, the original interest in this is that I was talking to a lot of clients who they were struggling to get their head around this space in terms of, well, what do these products offer? And then when I do a search, there seem to be loads of different options overlapping, and some that sound right at first, but they're actually much more oriented towards, say, HR services, or they're much more a document management platform. They're not quite what we're looking for. So we got a directory of products that we think sit in this intranet and employee experience space. And at the last count, it was over 240 products. It's an unusual market in a way. If you think about HR systems or CRM systems, I don't think there's anywhere near that order of magnitude of options. It comes down to pretty quickly to a short list of maybe half a dozen players and so on. So that's why we see an opportunity to help people navigate this space. And then the other thing is about, once you've got a potential long list of products, I think it's really hard to go to vendors' websites and figure out what the heck they do. Because they all say, we'll boost productivity, we'll engage your employees, we'll make them more motivated, we'll reflect your employer brand. But I'm sat there thinking, but how do you do that? What makes you different to all the other ones? What are some of the upsides and downsides? So in our reports, we do scoring across a range of criteria, the scenarios. And we're not saying necessarily that is there a best product for any of this, but we are saying products are designed with a kind of a user base or a set of use cases in mind. What is it that the vendor's getting at? How do they see the world, and what kind of problems are they trying to solve? Just in the same way that an SUV is great as a family car, but it's not particularly sporty. Or you might buy a truck because you've got to haul a load of stuff from the home improvement store every week, but it's not going to be very fuel economical. So there are trade-offs. There are always trade-offs, and it's not a bad thing. But of course, you want to buy the right kind of car for your needs. You want to buy the right kind of platform for your company's needs.
Yeah, and I find your report really cuts through the muddiness that is out there, particularly with the intranet vendors, because they are playing a bit of a Me Too game in terms of vernacular, value prop, ROI, etc. And if you're not close to the space, you may not necessarily know vendor A, their technology heritage actually came up from knowledge management. Vendor B, they came up from social collaboration. Those could look very different. The criteria that you use, how do you begin to define and evaluate the vendors in your reports? And what are some of the criteria for those who are unfamiliar that you look at to really put that lens in and understand, okay, these folks do this, these folks do this, help the clients really understand, well, who's doing what?
So a lot of it actually starts with the digital workplace framework that we use for our consulting work, actually. If you pop over to our website, it won't be hard to find our framework, which we view as like a town plan. So we look at it in that way, because very rarely when you're looking at any technology for your business are you starting with a green field. And so we look at this town plan, the way the different buildings slot together with things like roads and sewers and things to connect them. And the town plan, the digital workplace, delivers a series of services. And we break those down into 5 different areas, which include things like communication and engagement and collaboration, business services, that sort of thing. And so we really use that as a starting point for most of the things that we do. And that includes the scenarios that we use to assess our products against in the report. And so we take that basic framework, and then we also look at the technology that's available on the market. So those things that we have been seeing as we've been doing work with clients, as we've been researching the different products in the marketplace, to see what they're delivering, the things that people really want to have from these solutions. And we kind of use that as an overlay on top of our framework to break down those different service areas, to reposition some of them into different business scenarios. And as Sam's already mentioned, they are real business scenarios. They aren't a tick list of features. It isn't we have to see AI, generative AI features for creating news. It's nothing like that. It's more, we want to see how well an internal communicator can create a news piece, but also an infrequent publisher. How can they create news easily? What support is there for them working with an internal communicator to then make sure their piece is suitable to go out to the organization? Then how can the internal comms person manage the whole flow of news and see what else is coming? And then also communicate out into different channels. And so that's how the scenarios expand out from that real basic starting point, to make them that business case that we want to see the vendors address in their own different ways. And as Sam's already mentioned, it's how's best for them and their product that they then show us, and then we assess them against each other, against the same framework. So there's that parity of the scoring so that people can do that direct comparison.
Yeah, well put, Suzie. What I would add is that what we bring from the consulting side is that we are always working with clients, large and small, who are going through this thinking process themselves. They are saying, we've looked at the market, we know we want to replace a platform, we've got a big internal change coming and we want to be ready for it. ClearBox, can you help us choose the right platform for it? And we normally say, well, in order to do that, we need to know your requirements. You know your requirements, and say, well, no, not really. So I say, well, do you have a strategy overall for your internet or digital workplace that would drive the requirements? And you say, no, not really. So we roll up our sleeves, we develop the strategy, we pin down the requirements, and then we come to thinking about the technology. And as we do that in-depth thinking with a client, what we're noticing is, well, what is it in their business world that's at the forefront of their minds for the problems to solve? What are they seeing in terms of the gaps in the employee experience offer that they expect this kind of platform to fill? And that has shifted over time. So if you look 10 years back, a lot of people said the internet was also the place where you collaborated on documents. And now with Microsoft Teams, for example, and Slack, that workload has really moved off from these platforms. And interestingly, what's kind of come to the fore again tends to be the employee communication and engagement piece, where there's an even stronger demand for the corporate voice of authority, the single source of truth, the the really high quality, crisp reference information that people might struggle to find elsewhere. And then the other one that really comes to mind to me as a shift over time is employees seem to be facing more and more tools in their working lives, and getting things like, fairly simple requests, requesting leave or a desk move or onboarding a new supplier. It can get really complicated knowing where to go. So, tools like Workgrid, they address that kind of problem head on. And therefore, we're always looking at our scenarios every time we do the report and saying, does this reflect what's in the heads of potential buyers? Does this reflect well the kind of things that they're trying to discriminate between? So pretty much every year we have tweaked the scenarios. For the most recent report, we adjusted them quite a lot. But yeah, we're always kind of on the side of the buyer primarily, and then trying to help them navigate through all the vendor choices.
Fantastic. That's, I want to take that as an aside, is the fact that change that has happened, particularly around let's just call it the intranet space, as you will. And of course, it's gone through many iterations and names: employee experience platform, digital workplace, etc. But that change, particularly where activity, collaboration may occur, has gone to Teams, has gone to Slack. It's leaked out to other. And then, of course, it's the value prop of what is the intranet today compared to what that was back when, 2015, it was basically Jive or SharePoint. You were going to go with one. If you're a SharePoint house, there's overlays available. If you can go with a best of breed, Jive software was the way to go. We don't live in that day anymore. What has changed? Where does the value live as a part of the intranet in 2024? What are some of those trends you're seeing as a part of the report as a whole?
There have been an awful lot of changes. So as I already mentioned, I was a practitioner for a good chunk of time, and a significant change that I went through was the introduction of smartphones into people's personal lives, and the emergence of social media platforms that people suddenly started using very, very frequently again in their personal lives. And then the slow progression from that personal experience into the workplace was quite significant and quite fascinating to watch, actually. And so people's expectations of the user experience of internal tools is now the same as using an external one. And so even little things like any social activities on intranets and similar tools, people are expecting that range of reaction types to things so that they can express different things other than just a thumbs up and a like. And that's just a kind of like a tiny indicator of that broader change. But what's also been interesting is the very slow adoption of mobile as a way to address different employee needs, particularly in the front line. We still see, when we work with clients, there is still a little bit of hesitation around delivering a mobile first product to them. There's partly a concern about people's free time and not wanting to disturb people, and there are laws around that in some countries as well, which is understandable. But actually, there's a real need there and a real opportunity there that I think particularly intranet managers and people who manage similar tools could make better use of to really address those people's needs. Because I think although technology has changed and our scenarios have changed and the different tools that we've looked at have evolved over time, the core purpose of an intranet or any similar tool is to essentially make people's daily lives better and to improve their working lives, to help them find the things that they need, the people that they need, so that complete tasks like booking holiday really simply, or recording things to do with their job. And if there's a way to consolidate all of that into a piece of technology, then I think that's really beneficial, but still an area with a huge amount of opportunity, I think, across the industry.
A couple of things that have struck me. So one is that we've seen a shift towards broader thinking about communicating across multiple channels. So it used to be that there was the intranet as a kind of the one and only presentational channel, and then there were probably lots and lots and lots of email newsletters going out all over the shop. We really used to spam our own employees in many organizations. And now what people are looking for tends to be that idea of, can I create it in one place and then push it out to the appropriate channel, which might be an employee app, it might be the intranet, in a newsletter digest. Digital signage has grown quite a lot as well over the last few years for the in-person experience, but really have that centralized management where I can get just one set of analytics. If they engage with it on a social channel, within like an online community, can I understand that it's the same user that then also clicked on the link when they got the email about a related story? I think it's driven by people in internal communications looking over the fence at what their external communication and marketing colleagues have with some of the very fancy tools that push out across LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and so on, and having very good analytics and very good kind of content management systems, and even whole kind of user journeys around it, and saying, we want that stuff too. It absolutely makes sense in terms of making the most of our job. And related to that, the other trend is, I think there's a much greater awareness of what you might call the attention economy. So a mindfulness that employees are very busy and very distractible, and therefore you have to be parsimonious with your asks on them. So one of the things that I like in particular the frontline worker first apps is things like just 2-minute learning cards. Here's a new product that we're rolling out. Just watch this 90-second video, or here's a little quiz about it. Very much in the consumer mode, in the same way that people constantly swipe on Instagram or TikTok and so on, just bite-sized digestible pieces. But then what's different in the workplace is sometimes you really do need to know the detail. There's no getting around it. If there's a health and safety guideline that everybody has to follow, yes, you can chunk it up, but there has to come a point where you also give access to that deep read. And we shouldn't shy away from it. We should just be very careful about when we ask people to dedicate that time to it. So personalization, really precise targeting is also something that we are asked for more. We've always thought it was really important, but it definitely seems to be much higher up people's wish lists now to provide that. So you are giving something that feels personally relevant to someone when they come to your platform.
Now, that's a good point, particularly around personalization. And there's a split almost between the players who are mobile first, or the technology heritage arose from being more akin in line to frontline, and then intranet players attempting to break into that world. And you've seen that from the mobile first players as well, trying to get to the intranet. What does the future there look like? Are there vendors who are starting to truly bridge the gap? Because a few years back, it was very difficult to find someone who could do it all in terms of, yes, we can give that beautiful mobile first experience, and for our desktop folks, what they need.
It's improved a lot, I would say, particularly in the last year, actually. I would say I would have given you a slightly different answer this time last year as opposed to now. And it's been quite remarkable to see the improvements that a lot, particularly of the intranet vendors, have made, and the developments that they've come up with their app products, or app versions of their products, to make them either automatically more streamlined or streamlinable, so that intranet managers can customize the experience between environments. I would say that employee mobile app products on desktop remain very simple. So I think it's harder for organizations to choose an employee mobile app product for everybody, because there are some complexities that might be needed that they don't do as well. So things like branding, for example, or enterprise search, or very thorough search and document management, that sort of thing, isn't really done in those tools because it's not really needed for the front line, that it's not as important for them. So it's just not an area of focus for those vendors. On the flip side, then, I think that intranet vendors have seen that need for a mobile experience and then have made those really positive developments. And a lot of them have realised that there does need to be that different experience. There's a lot that do just kind of lift and shift, so it feels more like an intranet in your pocket, or is very, very in-depth tool. And so that can be still, I think, overwhelming for the frontline. It can be a little bit too broad and too deep, whereas employee app products are a little bit narrower in what they're trying to do, and so are more appropriate in that sense. But there are some products that are nailing both pretty well. And I would say have a read of our report and to see which ones are which, because I wouldn't want to name them. I think it's interesting to see what people want from those tools. So rather than me name drop, I think it probably would be better to go and have a read and see if it does meet what you would be expecting if you're one of those organizations.
It's a subtle thing, and it's not really a technology barrier, but I think the strength of a lot of the mobile first frontline facing vendors is actually the understanding of verticals and what it takes to deploy into these environments. So unlike the internet space, which tends to be quite industry agnostic, we still see a lot of mobile app vendors who have got a real strong toehold in, for example, transportation or the service industry. And it's because they get how to engage that workforce with a particular rollout activity. And it's much harder just at a practical level to engage that kind of workforce, because you can't just send them an email with a link saying, download this, because for a lot of frontline workers who might be hourly or contingent workers, you don't have an email address. You may not even have a mobile phone number for them. So the whole onboarding step, it needs some clever thought. Some of the things that I've seen that I really like are, for example, QR codes to, you can scan those, you can download the app, and then you can self-enroll. And also one of the apps, and I won't name it because I can't remember who it was, but they do a very neat thing where the team supervisor can reissue a password just for maybe the 6 or 10 people that work for them. So rather than having to phone some central IT help desk if you've forgotten your password, which probably means it'll never happen, you can go to your supervisor. They know who you are, so they are empowered to reissue your password for you there and then.
Something I would add to that as well, actually, is around that closeness with the verticals and helping with the rollout, is that we do see the employee app products actually having boots on the ground, as it were, and going to their clients and physically helping them with the rollout of these tools. I will name Blink because we've got some photos in our report actually of them doing that with one of their clients and going and setting up those little booths to help people get on and explain what's needed and do the demo. So it's completely taken out of the client's hand, and they don't have to worry about that. And they know that it's going to be done very thoroughly, that all of their employees are going to have their questions answered really by the people that absolutely know the product the best. And I think that's quite unusual because intranet vendors just don't typically do that sort of thing. And it's quite a big differentiator.
That's a big shift for you, Rob. You're talking about back in 2015 when it was all SharePoint and Jive. I mean, I remember talking to clients and saying, so what percentage of your employees use the intranet? Oh, we think it's probably about 80 or 90%. I go, oh, that's fantastic, because you've got about 5,000 people working in factories, haven't you? Oh, no, we don't mean them when we say 85 to 90%. It's almost like these are sub-citizens who don't get counted at all. So, okay, so it's more like 40% of your workforce. Yeah, but the office workers, they all use it. And I think that was always a big shame. There is so much knowledge in your frontline workers. Many of those are customer facing, or they're the ones who actually get to see your product in use on the ground. They see how customers maybe adapt it to some other scenarios that might give you ideas for innovation. They're the ones who see how it fails and maybe give better input to the engineering team about how it could be designed to be more robust. What we have now is the opportunity to open up those two-way channels and hear back from all that frontline experience. And also, even in sales as well, just about everybody by default has got an iPad or has got a laptop. We can connect with these people so much more readily because if you're like an intranet manager, you don't have to worry about the capital cost of giving them the technology. Your concern is how do we actually engage with them in a way that's sympathetic to their work environment and the time pressures that they have.
Excellent. Where do you think that appreciation has grown out of? The appreciation for the fact that, we do need to be connecting with our frontline workers, for those who are in the field, in the thick of it. regardless from a CX perspective in terms of opportunity. But it sounds like you've seen that come around.
Yeah, so some of it is the CX perspective. So we talk a lot about customer journeys, and if some of your journey is in the real world, and it's not everything done through the website, then how do you understand that journey? Of course, there's a piece that you're provisioning through your representatives, your sales staff, and so on. In the pandemic, a lot of key workers, frontline workers, they're the ones that carried on going to the office while we were all tucked up at home and adapting to using our laptops on the ironing board and setting up an impromptu home office and all that kind of thing. So they probably got a lot more recognition of the importance that they had to an organization, and maybe empowered a little bit more to ask for things. And then I think the third driver is, as consumer technology has kind of become all pervasive, everybody has a mobile phone now. This is not a exclusive technology, and therefore again employees come with expectations. So always we hear of the shadow IT around things like WhatsApp and messaging systems, where a lot of company work happens, but not in an officially sanctioned way. And that's just grassroots employees saying, hey, this is going to help me with my work. I can organize shifts with my peers by setting up a WhatsApp group. So they go ahead, and it almost forces the employer's hand to say, yeah, we see why you're doing that, but we also see downsides. So we're going to have to address it. We can't just take it away. The genie's out the bottle. Let's think about something which is more enterprise grade that fulfills your need as an employee and meets our security concerns.
Excellent.
I think there's always been a desire to address that group of people as well. So I think in a lot of cases, there's been an awareness of this huge percentage of an organization that has been unreachable, or the way that they've been reached has been like black magic that only certain people can do or know how to do. And so the people who try to make decisions to affect the whole business maybe don't understand how to go about even having those conversations to try and figure out how to reach them all. And so I think actually the technology has helped shape that conversation internally, where those parts of the business that are responsible for those frontline workers, usually it's like an operations department or something along those lines, they're almost going out themselves and finding their own tools to share with their people, which again may be shadow tech or may be done without consulting the IT team. And so there are things like we've seen working with a client where in the construction industry where builders were going out and downloading their own tools so that they could make a to-do list and have it electronically saved so that they could then save their photos to prove what they'd done, so it would all be tied back into building that particular house. And I think there are those use cases that intranet managers and kind of the adjacent job roles that look after intranets and these sorts of tools are then seeing and connecting the dots between what's now possible with this technology. And so I do think that it's been a little bit of a joint development between the technology itself and also business needs really influencing and supporting each other.
One of my favourite examples is from Transport for London, who run the subway system. And the night shift of engineers, they started posting on social media pictures of tunnels or junctions and saying, guess which part of the underground network this is? And all the office staff were like, oh, well, this is a really good puzzle, trying to figure out what it is. And it was the first time the night shift actually connected with any of the peers, because of course they never saw them. The office workers were always kind of 9 to 5, and suddenly they were getting lots of recognition and interest in the work that they were doing. That's the kind of unplanned but really useful connectivity you get by giving digital tools to everybody, rather than just making it something that just the office workers have.
There's another Transport for London example that I really like as well, actually, is they have an annual Underground in Bloom competition, which people who work on the stations take photos of all their flower displays and all of their paintings and things, and they enter a competition where they all vote for each other, and then there's a winner at the end of it. And obviously during lockdown, there were far fewer members of staff actually working at the stations. There were fewer passengers going through, and some of them were shut down. A lot of furloughed staff. And so they actually turned the competition almost on its head, and it became their own gardens and their own flower displays and their own parks and things. And so what was quite a isolating experience with the pandemic, they used this tool to then bring people together and to really build that culture and bring that sense of community into the tool, and then into the team who were working or not even working from home, having to be at home. And I just think that's a really nice way that they used a digital tool to really bring people together in a remote way. It's really, really fascinating story.
Those are great stories to hear, where they're leveraging the technology as a way to align the organization, help enrich their culture. Oftentimes, you don't necessarily see that in terms of success. Flipping to kind of the consultative side, what are some of the biggest misconceptions you're oftentimes having to go back to, particularly around Intranet's digital workplace technologies, so that application owners, digital workplace leaders can really understand the topography and align the technology to their culture?
I think we still often in business talk about culture as if it's an output variable.
Mm-hmm.
So you design this system and at the end you change the culture, but it isn't really, unless you're the chief executive or a C-level. Culture is a constraint. Culture is a thing that you need to factor into your design. So when we work with clients, they say we want this outcome. So often it's about sharing knowledge across silos more. That's been coming up for years and years. And you say, well, how do we change our culture to make people share? That's casting it entirely in a way that's setting yourself up for failure.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably much more, how do we work with our culture in a way that facilitates the sharing that people would already be amenable to doing? And in practical terms, so often it relies on the social networks, the Be Your Engage, Amazon, and so on. And in some organizations, it might be about having experts lead the way and maybe doing like internal posts or 5-minute videos or little snippets of learning. And it's fine in those organizations, often the more intellectual ones, to stand up and say, I know this stuff. In other organizations, that really would completely fall flat and people would find it intimidating. So for them, maybe your approach is to, particularly for like internal communications, act as someone who validates and amplifies someone already doing good work. Hey, I heard about that thing that you did a couple of weeks ago. Can we interview you and make a little story about it? And we'll be the one that shouts on your behalf. And then often in that kind of organization, what you see are lots of positive comments and discussion around that example. So one client we worked with, they had a guy who was Greek, and he did a post about coming out and saying how hard it was for a Greek guy. It's quite a macho culture to talk about his sexuality, but that he was really grateful in this company that he had lots of support from his colleagues. And this was something internal communications picked up and said, this is great. This is absolutely in line with our values and the culture that we feel we should be expressing. So we're going to do a story about it. So they amplified that example. It became the most commented post that they'd ever had across all of their platforms. And it's about sometimes, I think, just picking up on the highlights, the positive spots, and saying, what do we do to make that more of an exemplar that other people will follow?
I think I may go with a controversial suggestion for the preconceptions that clients come with. I would say that not all of them, but some organizations have already decided on their tech solution before they figure out what it is they actually want to achieve. Which may be because of historical investment, and maybe because there is an entire suite of applications that are just sitting there tempting you to use them. But just because they're there doesn't mean that they are the right things to use. Of course, that doesn't mean you can't figure out ways to use them effectively and to position them appropriately in an organization. You absolutely can. But I think automatically deciding on the technology is something that can harm these sorts of projects that we're involved with. As an example, I am going to pick on Microsoft and SharePoint because it's easy, I suppose. But
please do.
Because it's there. But as an example, the Microsoft suite is huge. There are all sorts of applications there, and some of them, I mean, a lot of them are fantastic. But if you do have a frontline workforce, it's arguable whether the suite of applications that Microsoft offers is actually suitable and appropriate for that frontline, for the reasons we've already talked about, some of the practical things that they want to do, as well as the communications and collaboration and informal chats and doing things very simply. The Microsoft Teams app isn't necessarily the most appropriate to do that with. Even Viva Connections, Viva Engage, the apps for those aren't necessarily the right things to do. The fact that they would have to be in Entra ID to be able to use it as well, it can form its own challenge. So I don't think that having those tools means that organizations should automatically use them. And I was going to say something else which has gone out of my head. Hang on a sec.
Well, to that point, Susie, while you're thinking that this is something that we often see sends clients off the road a little bit, is that they have like 3 solutions to the same problem.
Mm-hmm.
And they get stuck in this limbo of not being able to turn off any of those 3. So again, you might see Viva Engage, you might see a social application with the intranet, and you've got Chatter on Salesforce that all the frontline guys are using. And it means that there's no single place for a conversation to happen. And anybody who is within the company saying, well, I want to get the word out about my project, they feel a little bit hamstrung about, well, where's the right place to do it? Because I don't want to do it 3 times. And unless you put in place good governance or make some quite strict decisions, you end up probably making all 3 of them ghost towns, because you just don't sustain the critical mass that you need for success around them.
And that takes quality rationalization, understanding your tech debt, your landscape, and being able to make the hard decision that, hey, we're not going to be pulled by the gravity of all those unused toys. We're going to focus on what's right for our employee and their journey.
And the other point I was going to make, sorry, I've remembered it, is just because you don't use one of the applications within a suite of tools doesn't mean you can't use any of them. So if you're thinking about, say, the front line again, perhaps one of the Microsoft applications isn't the best thing for them to use as the app tool for the front line. SharePoint may absolutely be the best thing for you to use, though, for your intranet. So there's no reason you can't use one without the other, and vice versa. If SharePoint actually isn't the best solution for your intranet for whatever reasons they may be, you can still use Microsoft Teams as your collaboration tool, and you could use the Viva Engage application for your collaboration and community stuff. So they are independent things that can be thought about independently. They aren't just one solid mass of tool that has to all be used or none of it used.
Back to the gym analogy, you don't have to use every piece of equipment in the gym for every workout. It's about being selective and saying, what's the right match for our needs? As
I've learned, as I've entered middle age, absolutely. It's only there's certain equipment you stay away from. One of my last questions I have for you here is, beyond the report and kind of what you saw as a steady state, I have to ask the AI question. Where do you see AI and ML taking shape within Intranet's digital workplaces? And what are your hopes for the future and a little bit beyond?
We've done really well not to mention AI up to now, haven't we?
I know, we did a great job, right?
Susie, do you want to talk about some of the patterns we're seeing this year around AI, and I'll maybe talk about the future?
Yes, Sam is the proper expert on this. But what we've seen just in the last year, so again, this time last year, I would have given you a very different answer. In fact, probably wouldn't even have mentioned AI at all, because vendors weren't referring to their AI tools as AI at that time. So there were things already around, say, search and in the back ends that were absolutely AI technologies, but they weren't being positioned as that because it wasn't a thing. But in the last year, we've seen a lot of generative AI features appear. And they are very supportive, actually. And I think for me, that's where I like to see the AI being developed, where it's a support for people rather than necessarily taking over maybe an enjoyable part of a job. As a communicator writing, yes, you might want help with making something shorter because you know you're particularly verbose, like I know I am when I write. So having something that reduces the length of a piece is very helpful. Likewise, there's a tool called Oak Engage that has a policy generation tool, which will generate a fairly generic policy in a set template for you if you don't already have it, which can be a really nice way just to spin something up that you can then use as a framework to build on and to edit down. Outside of generative AI, we've also seen it appearing in search, as I've already mentioned, but being developed a little bit more thoroughly. So the kind of likely answers approach you get when you Google something, there are now AI generated versions of that in intranet tools that will actually look at the content of an intranet and then present an answer. We're not seeing maybe the links back to where the original files are, so you can validate what you're seeing, and some of that teaching step I think is missing of AIs that would be beneficial to have more of those brought in, and also more ring fencing, of course. But there's an awful lot of really interesting and fun stuff. As just one more example, Mango Apps has got this really nice feature where an AI will take a piece of written content and turn it into an audio file. So you can have a kind of podcast approach if people would rather listen to news rather than read it because, say, they're a frontline worker, or for accessibility needs as well, which is one of those things that I hadn't really thought of for AI tools. But actually, it really helps those people who may have a vision issue to be able to listen to the news that's really important to them rather than having to read it. And it requires no effort on the side of communications in order to do it because the system does it for you.
The thing that really seems to grab people's attention with generative AI is the generation bit, be that images or text. And the unsung hero in all this, though, is actually the dialogue management. That has really come on leaps and bounds. If you think about your average chatbot interaction even 3 or 4 years ago, if you wanted to book leave and halfway through the process said, oh, wait a minute, can I change that to March? Normally the chatbot would say, I'm sorry, you've got to start again. I don't know what you mean. Whereas now with something like ChatGPT, you can have quite a long threaded discussion where you can make references to things implicitly that have been part of the dialogue before, and it will understand you. So, for example, who were our top 20 customers in the last year? And it will give you some information. And then you can say, which one of those were based in France in the last quarter? And there's loads of ambiguity in that. You know, what does those mean? What does last quarter mean? But it absolutely understands what you are meaning based on what you said before. So for intranets where you get an answer based on a series of dialogues, this is something that I think we'll be talking about a lot more in the year to come, because then it really does become a good supplement for the kind of thing that you might have called an HR helpline for in the past to get help with your 401k, where you know, I haven't just got one simple question with a canned answer. I've got a series of questions, so I need you to step me through it. The other thing I'm really hoping to see that we didn't see a great deal of yet is AI help for internet and digital workplace governance and analytics. So for years, we've had analytics packages that'll throw out endless bar charts and pie charts and all kinds of cool and funky graphs. And people generate these things and they put it in front of their boss with PowerPoint deck and so on. What do we do differently based on all these pie charts, graphs, and so on? Generally, right. So a bit of AI coaching to say, I notice this pattern in the usage of your platform. Here's what we should do about it. Or even better, automatically orchestrating things in response. So if the AI picks up that generally the best time to send out a long read is Thursday afternoon, it could start automatically scheduling that long read or boosting it on a Thursday afternoon. And indeed, ultimately, if we notice that Joe looked at it on a Thursday afternoon, but Erica looked at it on a Friday morning, Joe and Erica can have different, very personalized experiences.
Technology that enables the employee, gets out of their way, and doesn't add friction to their day. Absolutely.
Yeah. Back to being respectful of their attention.
That's the dream.
Suzie, Sam, thanks so much for coming on the show today. Where can folks learn more about the report and really the fantastic consultancy work that you folks do?
Well, thank you very much for having us on. It's been a great pleasure. So our website, clearbox.co.uk, and Susie's a report.
Yep, and then it's just /reports, and then you'll find it there and some of the other things that we're planning to work on in the next year as well. So you'll be able to keep an eye on what's there. Also have a look at our blog. So we blog very, very frequently still, talk about all sorts of things. So if you're looking for any inspiration or even a particular topic, go and have a look there. And then in the resources section, you'll also find that big directory that Sam referenced with all of the tools that we're aware of on the market. So you can go and have a look and see what else is there if you want to do additional research.
Fantastic. Thanks again, folks.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.